As climate change, water shortages and energy issues dominate the international environment, the importance of scientific information is coming to the fore. Two Dunedin academics are looking at how what they call science diplomacy might help in that environment. Our regular commentator on international politics is one of the two, and as part of a series highlighting recent Otago research, Professor Robert Patman joins us tonight. Good evening.
Good evening, Rebecca.
What is scientific diplomacy?
Science diplomacy is a term that's popularised from about 2010 onwards. It refers broadly to scientific collaboration among nations and with the prospect of increasing international partnerships. And so this sort of collaboration is designed to address common problems. And the notion, I think, of science diplomacy is a response to major changes which have occurred internationally in the last 3 decades, particularly the notion of globalisation. That is the sense the world's getting a smaller place, and what used to be domestic policy is increasingly becoming blurred and overlapping with foreign policy. So we have a much more complex, a much more interconnected world. And many of the problems facing countries now cannot be solved by them singularly or unilaterally. That is to say, if you think of problems in the environmental area, problems in the economic area, problems in the security area, none of those problems respect sovereign boundaries, and they need international solutions. And I think the rise of science and diplomacy, or science diplomacy, is part of response to this broader changes in the international environment that's occurring.
Practically, how will this work?
Well, we have a number of examples of science diplomacy in action. There is what's called science in diplomacy. That is where the scientific advice, which informs policy. We see this, for example, in the UN, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is about 2,500 scientists, a panel which was formed in 1988. That provides advice and reports and shapes much of the public debate on climate change. And then you look at other examples that might be described as diplomacy for science. There's something called the Square Kilometre Array Project, which Australia, New Zealand and South Africa have participated in, which is a radio telescope project which is being shared by a number of countries. And then there's what might be called science for diplomacy, where science plays a role in trying to improve international relations between countries. One can think of, for example, that the American scientists have continued to have interactions with their counterparts in countries like North Korea, Iran, Burma, authoritarian regimes where there's diplomatically relations are in a very, very poor state or perhaps non-existent. So the hope is that scientific collaboration from the bottom up can spill over into the diplomatic sphere.
What sort of results might we see from this research?
Well, we're hoping that this book, which brings together an international collection of specialists in different areas, will, if you like, reinforce the need for science to play a greater role in diplomacy. It seems to me, if you look at the climate change negotiations, for example, which have stumbled on for 2 decades, really, if you include Kyoto, they haven't produced too much. And I think the public is very frustrated. One of the reasons for this is diplomats often do not understand the science of climate change, the whole idea of a tipping point notion, that the climate reaches a certain point and then we could go quickly into another global climate. That's not widely understood, and we think that popularising the notion of science diplomacy, giving it more impetus intellectually, might actually bring about, if you like, more substantial problems, to more substantial solutions to what exists as to be clearly big problems.
Professor Robert Patman, thanks very much for your time.
Thank you.